Well, hello, ladies and gents. What I'm going to do in this clip is walk you through the tissue comparison and integration document, showing you what to work on in the document. Now, if you want to just do a screen grab, you could grab this image and then sort of zoom around into whatever part you need to focus on. But I'm going to walk through each particular box and talk about what's going on there. So let's start with epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue has three types. There's simple, meaning it's one layer, stratified, meaning multiple layers, and then there's glandular epithelial tissue that secretes different substances like sweat or hormones, whatever the case may be. So just remember, simple is a single layer and stratified is multiple layers. That's an important feature. Now, in terms of what sketches to include, this might be pretty tight. So if you want to draw in other areas, you can. But for simple squamous, in blue there is the basement membrane. And then you have one flat layer of cells. Squamous is telling us it's flat. For stratified squamous, we have several flat layers of cells. So again, if it's simple, it's one layer. If it's stratified, it's multiple layers. With simple columnar, again, it's got the basement membrane in blue, and it's a single layer of those sort of columnar-shaped cells. I also added some goblet cells in here with some arrows showing how you can secrete things like mucus on these mucous membranes. The last type of simple tissue I'll look at is simple cuboidal. This tends to be in ducts and glands. Simple cuboidal tissue, it's again one layer of cells, but they're cube shaped and they tend to be cylindrical like that. Let's see. The other type of stratified tissue I'd like to look at is transitional epithelium. This is what you have like lining your bladder or lining the uterus. Transitional epithelium is just sort of this jumble of cells, and when the organ stretches out, the cells can stretch out or the tissue can stretch out, but you still have multiple layers there providing protection. The last thing I have included here is a couple of examples of glands. So there are two types of glands you need to know: exocrine and endocrine. Exo means outside of, so exocrine glands have a duct, and then they dump their contents onto some surface of the body. So that could be sweat going out onto the surface of the body. Again, it could be something related to the digestive system, whatever the case may be. Endocrine glands, endo means within or inside. So endocrine glands release their contents directly into the bloodstream. And you'll notice they don't have any ducts there. All right. Let's see. Functions of these different types of tissues. Simple squamous is a good tissue for diffusion. Because it's one flat layer, it can allow gases to pass through it pretty readily. Stratified squamous has lots of layers there for protection. So think of like your skin or your esophagus. If you have some cells scratched off, no biggie, because you have multiple cells there for protection anyway. Secretion, that tends to happen in simple cuboidal tissue. Again, think of like a gland or a duct. You have these cells secrete substances into this lumen or cavity, and then it can get delivered to some other parts of the body. And then the other function of epithelial tissues is to absorb materials. Think of like absorbing nutrients from your small intestine. Now, where do we find epithelial tissues? Epithelial tissues are found on surfaces of the body. Okay, so your skin is a great example, but the lining on the inside of organs, lining on the outside of organs, those are all epithelial tissues. All right, let's see. Next, we're going to look at connective tissues. So there are 5 broad categories of connective tissue that we're looking at here: bone, cartilage, blood, loose connective tissue, and then dense fibrous connective tissue. Now, in all cases, connective tissues are living cells in a non-living extracellular matrix. So let's look at our example drawing. I tried to combine some different connective tissues. So here we have bone. That's one type of connective tissue. On the ends of long bones, you have articular cartilage. It's a type of hyaline cartilage. It's real glossy and smooth. That decreases friction between the bones when they move. And then dense fibrous connective tissues have interwoven proteins, so they tend to have a lot of tensile strength. You can pull on them, and they're pretty strong. So tendons are a good example of dense fibrous connective tissue that connects muscle to bone. Blood is also a connective tissue. So blood has cells like red blood cells and white blood cells in a non-living plasma. And then loose connective tissue, that's what we see in areolar tissue. That's like sort of like a packing material that's around organs. It helps absorb nutrients and water. All right, let's see. So looking at functions, bone, it protects organs, provides support, so things like muscle can attach, and then you can store things like calcium ions in bone. Cartilages provide flexible support. So think of like the cartilages on the end of long bones are going to decrease friction. You can have other types of cartilage like in your nose or your ears. So again, flexible support. Dense fibrous connective tissues have a lot of proteins interwoven there, so they're really tough and strong. So that's like ligaments and tendons. Loose connective tissues have fibers that sort of run in all sorts of different directions, and they're a lot more loosely packed. So that's, again, like wrapping organs. Or adipose tissue or fat tissue is also a type of loose connective tissue, so that stores energy. And then finally, blood is a type of connective tissue that people forget pretty easily. And again, the function of blood is to be a medium or a material through which you transport all sorts of materials around the body. Where do we find connective tissue? Well, it's holding everything together, right? So you can be holding together muscles with collagen. It can be wrapped around organs like in areolar tissue or fats. Your blood travels through your circulatory system. And of course, there's bone, and that's found in your skeletal system. Okay, looking at muscle. There are 3 categories of muscle you need to know: smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and cardiac muscle. Now, smooth muscle cells are tapered. That means they're wider in the middle and narrower on the ends. They're said to be smooth because they lack striations, so you don't see any stripes under the microscope. They're uninucleate, meaning they have a single nucleus. And what's key here is they are involuntary. So you don't decide when smooth muscles contract. You don't decide when your intestines contract or your stomach contracts or when your blood vessels contract or dilate. Okay? Smooth muscles are involuntary. And where do we find them? They line hollow organs. Now let's contrast this with skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle fibers run parallel to one another. So they all run the same direction, so they're pulling all in the same direction. Helps you, increase the force that you can create with your muscle contraction. Skeletal muscles are striated, so there are some stripes to talk about later on in the semester. And muscle cells are multinucleate. They can donate their nuclei to help repair the cells. Now, muscle cells are the only types of, muscle tissue, I should say. Muscle tissue is the only type of tissue in the muscle category that's voluntary, that you decide when it contracts. And we'll find it attached to bone or skin. The last category of muscle we look at is cardiac muscle. Now, cardiac muscle is branched so that signals pass rapidly through the tissue. They are striated, so there are stripes there, and they are multinucleate. Now, cardiac muscle, thankfully, is involuntary, so you don't have to think about making your heart beat 60 to 80 times a minute. And again, we find it just in the heart. All right, now, here are images of the 3 types of muscle. Again, smooth muscle cells are uninucleate and tapered. Skeletal muscle cells run parallel to one another. They have multiple nuclei, and they are striated. And then cardiac muscle, you know it when you see it because it's branched, multinucleate, striated, and you have these intercalated discs. Those help signals pass through the muscle tissue more rapidly. All right, so what do these muscles do? Well, skeletal muscle moves your skeleton, moves your body, or it moves your skin to allow things like facial expressions. Smooth muscle lines hollow organs, so when it contracts, it pushes stuff through those organs, so it moves things through your body. And then again, cardiac muscle pumps the blood. Where do we find these muscles? Again, smooth muscle is found lining hollow organs. Skeletal muscle is attached to your skeleton or your face, or your skin, I should say. And again, cardiac muscle is found in the heart. All right, the last type of nervous tissue we're going to look at here, the last type of tissue we're going to look at is nervous tissue. Now, nervous tissue has 2 broad categories of cells, neurons and neuroglia. The only thing I'm going to sketch is a neuron. Neurons, we'll get into this in more detail second semester, but they basically send and receive electrical signals. Okay. Now, talking about function, let me move this over here. In regard to function, neurons, again, they send and receive those signals to allow your body to detect what's going on and react. The neuroglia are the support team that take care of those neurons. So there are cells that feed neurons, that hold neurons in place, that protect them from potential pathogens and that repair them if they're damaged. And where do we find nervous tissue? The obvious places like brain and spinal cord, but then we also have peripheral nerve traveling all around the body, and then receptors that are embedded in all sorts of tissues. All right. So my recommendation is, make sure you go through, or hopefully you've gone through the video and sort of listen to the explanations of things, and then you can snap an image and take pics. I'll come around and make a second clip looking at what happens on the back page. All right. Thank you much.